Hey, good evening from Tucson, Arizona, where I'm sitting in a lovely Sonoran Desert Valley, nestled between five mountain ranges, surrounded by a strange and delightful mix of cactus, those behind me not necessarily to scale. Wildflowers, spiny and now blooming trees. Yes, the palo verdes are still blooming a little late this year, I think. Intoxicating shrubs, venomous critters, plus coyotes, ringtails, bobcats, mountain lions, quadrumundi, javelina, Gila monsters, tarantulas, and tarantula hawks, carpenter bees, roadrunners, curved-billed thrashers, red-tailed hawks, and mother broad-billed hummingbird sitting right now with two tiny eggs right outside of my window, and you can actually check my Instagram for a recent photo of that. Other birds, small and large, and much more here on the unceded lands of the O'odham and the Yaqui. I thank them all, and I also thank you for joining us this evening. So I'll let somebody else in. Okay, and I thank the lovely Suzanne Frischkorn for hosting, and our readers this evening, Charles Goodrich, Patricia Caspers, and Greg Wrenn. Welcome all. My name is Simmons Bunton, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Terrain.org, the world's first online literary journal of place, and with a particular focus nowadays on place, climate, and justice. Tonight, you'll hear from Greg Wrenn, Patricia Caspers, and Charles Goodrich, who will read in that order, and they will be introduced by Terrain.org assistant poetry editor Suzanne Frischkorn. Let me just mute a sneezing friend. And let's see. So tonight we'll hear from Greg Wrenn. I'm going to admit somebody else real quickly. And Patricia Caspers and Charles Goodrich, who will read in that order. And they will be introduced by assistant poetry editor Suzanne Frischkorn, who's also on our editorial board, just before they read. We'll be sure to leave a little time for Q&A following the reading. So load up those questions and have them ready. Before I introduce Suzanne, I'd like to say a few announcements and such about Terrain.org. And otherwise. So first, if your connection becomes slow, you may want to turn off your video. And in all cases, I ask you to remain muted. Thank you. But please post your questions and other positive feedback in the chat. We are recording this, and all readings will make those available from Terrain.org and our YouTube channel shortly. In fact, we'd love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, because then you can get notifications. And also, we feel kind of special when we have more subscribers there. So let me just throw that in there. Now, don't go leaving us and get distracted by all those other videos on YouTube. Stay here with us tonight and then go back and subscribe. Let's see. So we're taking the summer off, but then after this reading, I should say, and then our next reading will be on August 26th, and we'll feature three readers, two of whom we know already, Pam Houston and Jennifer Case, reading from essential new pre-election, very important books. So that's going to be a really wonderful reading. And now, finally, a few announcements, in other words, about Terrain.org. Though the deadline for our limited run Climate Stories in Action series in partnership with Spring Creek Project at Oregon State University has passed, we are going to publish 12 pieces across genres, one per week, beginning May 27th. So if you're a submitter, do not fear yet. Notifications will be going out this weekend. We haven't made our final decisions on that. Our 15th annual contests in poetry, nonfiction, and fiction are open now, with a deadline of September 2nd, which is Labor Day here in the US. And winners in each genre receive $1,000 plus publication. Semifinalists receive, or finalists, I should say, receive $200 plus publication. And all entries are considered for publication. This year, the esteemed judges are Paisley Rekdal for poetry, Taylor Brorby for nonfiction, and Manuel Munoz for fiction. So be sure to check out our submission guidelines for more details on that. Let me just post that right here. Thank you. Okay, our regular submissions in all genres will open October 1st, by the way. Though our Letter to America and our Art Terrain Gallery submissions are open year-round. And we're currently not accepting review submissions, just so folks are aware. Finally, in honor of our Climate Stories in Action series beginning next week, we're also launching a short fundraising campaign dedicating all of the funds raised to paying contributors. Over the last 2 years, we have been a paying market, and with your support, we'll be able to continue to pay authors and artists for their work, which is really important to us. How do we do that when terrain.org is an all volunteer organization, is advertisement free, and except for these contests, does not charge to submit, and also does not charge to access the amazing contributions on our website? That's a very long question with lots of run-on, so thanks for bearing with me on that. We pay for that through donations. That's how we can actually pay our contributors. And our primary source of income is those donations by a long shot. So Terrain Publishing, which is terrain.org's parent organization, is a 501c3 tax exempt organization, and we'll gladly accept your donation for our fundraiser early, of course. This evening, right now, if you're so inclined, you can do that at terrain.org. And let me just throw a link in here that gets you right there. And thank you for letting me do that advertisement and for your consideration. Let me admit someone. Okay, so finally, let us now turn to tonight's reading, followed by Q&A. I'll be posting terrain.org publication and book links in the chat in support of our readers this evening, so keep an eye out for those. Also, be sure to post your thoughts and questions in chat as we look forward to an engaging conversation following the readings. And finally, thanks again for joining us. Let me admit one more person. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, Suzanne. Suzanne Frischkorn is the author of 4 poetry books, most recently the stunning collection Whipsaw from Anhinga Press, which was published in 2024, plus 5 chapbooks. She's the recipient of the Writers Center Emerging Writers Fellowship for her book Lit Windowpane, the Aldrich Poetry Award for her chapbook Spring Tide, which was selected by Mary Oliver, a Connecticut Individual Artist Fellowship, and a Swim Residency Award at the Betsy. Her poems have recently appeared or are forthcoming in the Denver Quarterly, North American Review, Salamander, South Dakota Review. You got the Dakotas, all right. Oh, wait, sorry, that's just one of them. And Latino Poetry, a Library of American Anthology. She is an editor at $ Poetry is Currency. I know I should know the name of that, Suzanne, sorry. And an assistant editor, poetry editor, and editorial board member for terrain.org. So Suzanne, thank you so much for hosting tonight, and take it away.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I am so honored to be here and hosting Greg and Patricia and Charles. I'm very excited to hear them read. I'm going to introduce Greg first, who's reading first. He is a former Stegner Fellow at Stanford University and the author of the queer ayahuasca. He told me how to say this. Ayahuasca eco-memoir Mothership, a memoir of wonder and crisis, and Centaur, which was awarded the Brittingham Prize in Poetry. His work has appeared in the New Republic, the Daily Beast, Al Jazeera, the Rumpus, and elsewhere. As an associate English professor at James Madison University, he weaves climate change science into literary studies. A student of ayahuasca since 2019, he and his husband live in Virginia on the ancestral homelands of the Manahoac and Monacan people. Apologies, Greg.
Oh, Suzanne, that's okay. That's okay. It's pronounced ayahuasca, but it's okay. It's totally fine. So thank you so much, Suzanne, for introducing me, and thank you so much, Simmons, for inviting me. And it's great to be here with Charles and Patricia. Yes, my eco memoir just came out, Mothership, and it's about how I turned to ayahuasca, which is a rainforest psychedelic tea, as well as endangered coral reefs, to heal complex PTSD, save my life, and awaken my ecological conscience. And so the part that I'm going to read from Mothership was the excerpt that Simmons took for the magazine, which just came out. And I think it's important to say that it's important to give a little bit of context around what I'm going to read, because it may sound like there's a lot of personal healing going on, and there is a lot of personal healing going on. But I want to read a quote from an Indigenous ayahuasca curandero shaman that I think sums up what I'm trying to say here and the kind of context I'm trying to give for this. So his name is Don Jose Campos, and he said, once when I drank ayahuasca, she very gently explained to me, look, I give to you, but I take away. I take away defects and I give you responsibilities. And so it's important for me to put this kind of personal healing in the Amazon in the context of that yes, the trauma was cleared from me in some really big ways, but what rushed in was ecological concern, even alarm, and the desire to do something about it, and to really add my voice to this conversation that we're having as a species. And so so just to say this experience in the Amazon, it gave me kind of a new sense of social concern. So basically, in this excerpt that I'm going to read from Mothership, I am in the Amazon. I have just I just had my first life-saving ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazon. I came to the Amazon as essentially as a psychiatric patient, not as a tourist or a thrill seeker or anything like that. And so after those ceremonies, I went to the most biodiverse part of the Amazon to integrate my experiences. Overjoyed after my first life-saving ayahuasca ceremonies, I traveled by boat 6 hours south to the Amazon Research Center in the Tamxiacu-Tehuayo Regional Conservation Area. Larger than Rhode Island, it's one of the most biodiverse sections of the staggeringly diverse Amazon. Manatees, pink and gray dolphins, and giant otters swim in the rivers. I would end up spotting pygmy marmosets, capuchin monkeys, stocky monkeys, spider monkeys, and mustached tamarins. More primate species live here than in any other protected area in the world. Despite my last name, Wrenn, I am not much of a birder, but the churring blue-crowned trogons did astound me. I didn't come here for the animals, though. Bodacious, I murmured as I looked up. This is a lapuna, my stocky guide Manuel said as he paddled us toward the gigantic tree coming out of the water. Some distance from it, he tied the canoe to some branches poking out of the water. It was the wet season. The rainforest was flooded with 6 feet of the swollen Tehuayo River, a 50-mile-long tributary of the Amazon. Que gigante, I exclaimed. Manuel didn't know how tall this lapuna was. Measuring it would require special equipment. But the species, the tallest in the Amazon, can reach 240 feet. Its crown can stretch out 200 feet. And the oldest approach a millennium in age. With exposed buttress roots resembling rocket fins, it felt like it might lift off any minute. The branches were dripping with bromeliads and orchids. On the bark were bumps and thorns and camo-colored lichen. Fish that Manuel called sardines puckered the water. My long legs hanging over the bow, I lay back in the canoe, a life jacket as my pillow. So imagine me just lying back in the canoe. Manuel dozed off, and I set my phone timer for 1 hour. By now, having taken me to meditate underneath some of the oldest, largest trees in Tehuayo, giants of the forest like the quinilla, paranari, oje, and machimango, Manuel was much more comfortable around me. When I told him I had just left an ayahuasca retreat, he looked at me a bit suspiciously. Too many foreign medicine men have caused big problems in local communities in Peru, like the Canadian guy the year before who murdered the Shipibo's spiritual mother. then was lynched afterwards by villagers. And as Manuel was quick to point out, some shamans, Peruvian and gringo, have bad intentions. In Peru, brujeria, black magic, is not woo-woo. It's considered by many people to be a real danger. But I knew why I was here. Given how malleable the brain is after psychedelics, this was a precious window of time I was not going to waste. A few years later, I learned just how special the psychedelic afterglow is from the work of Johns Hopkins researcher Gul Dolan. Giving MDMA, Molly, to octopuses and rats led her to an astounding finding. Psychedelics reopen the critical period for social reward learning. Marked by heightened neuroplasticity, a critical period is when certain experiences are needed by a child for normal development to occur. If the child doesn't receive the right inputs during that window of time, it may have long-lasting effects on development. Think of the 5-year-old on TikTok for hours most days instead of bonding with family and friends. Or a male zebra finch exposed to rock music instead of an elder's bird song. If the bird hasn't learned to sing by day 65 after hatching, he never will. Maybe give that finch a thimbleful of ayahuasca. A psychedelic experience, Gul Dolan theorizes, is the experience of critical periods reopening. This, I think, partly explains ayahuasca's remothering of me and why Amazonian cultures call the brew a teacher. Ayahuasca primes us for new learning, especially around social rewards. Happiness requires connection. So if you don't know how to connect with yourself and others, you've been set up for misery. At Tehuayo, with critical periods reopened, the first lessons of Madre Ayahuasca were instilled in my brain. I practiced relating with myself more cheerfully and rationally. It seemed like a good time to meditate intensively in nature, away from screens that could reinforce behaviors I was trying to end. As motivation, I remembered the two most inspiring words in the English language. I remember the two most inspiring words in the English language. Neurogenesis, new neurons being born in the brain. Neuroplasticity, neurons growing new branches and pruning others. Some of the 125 trillion synapses in the brain switching off and others switching on. And so just to pull back for a moment to add a little bit of commentary here, as a trauma survivor and as an earthling in the Anthropocene, I have felt like I've been in an impossible situation. Maybe you can relate to that. And so neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself, neurogenesis, this ability of the brain to actually create new neurons, those really are the most hopeful words that I know in the English language. There are 8 billion plus human brains on this planet, and collective change will only happen one brain at a time. Change is possible one brain at a time. And so I'm very interested in this relationship between psychedelics and sort of the evolving of human consciousness, because we have to change, right? We have to evolve. We can't continue to act out our collective addictive patterns. Okay, so I'll dip right back into this for another section. As I meditated on my back in the canoe, my propped up legs were spread apart, my most vulnerable parts facing the lapuna tree. With every exhale, my body sank further into the canoe, briefly reactivating the ayahuasca. In my mind's eye, I grew Lupuna roots, became the tree's twin. With no up or down, we were floating in outer space, our roots almost touching, like two neurons forming a synapse. My brain was replaced with a Lupuna's crown. I felt as tall as the tree and as patient and strong. Lupunas survive, no, thrive as they're inundated by seasonal floods. I'd stepped into a universal archetype, the tree of life. It seemed to say, my brownish white fruit isn't forbidden. Chill out, won't you? As my mindfulness deepened, the late afternoon sun suddenly breaking through the canopy shone into my brain. I had no skull or skin. Looking up at a triangle of sky shaped like a manta ray's wing, I kept silently saying, I praise you. I love you, whatever you are. In Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Annie Dillard famously sees the tree with the lights in it. For a half second, the Lupuna and I flickered like that, spitting like a pair of pilot lights in a draft. She writes, it was less like seeing than being seen. It was less like seeing than being for the first time seen, knocked breathless by a powerful glance. As during the ayahuasca ceremonies, flashbacks sped through me so fast I could barely see glimpses of the circus animals on my nursery wallpaper. But I stayed calm and centered, guarded by this tree and the research binder in my backpack. Repressed memories were surfacing. Fear was being driven out of them. The memories couldn't be erased, but as they reconsolidated, I trusted they were incorporating memories of this tree. I had faith that I'd be able to tolerate them whenever they resurfaced. They'd be less frightening then. With less fear, there's less need to medicate, and it's easier to connect with others. So that is pretty much it for that chapter. That's as much as I can read for now. But I can say that, being in this rainforest, really being able to connect with nature in this really deep way and integrate these experiences that were clearing a lot of my trauma. I experienced childhood flashbacks, but as you'll learn from reading my book, I also experienced ecological flash forwards. And those ecological flash forwards, what the planet will be like in 2050, in 2040, in 2030, those ecological flashbacks and those childhood flashbacks, the childhood flashbacks and the ecological flash forwards felt eerily similar in their doom and entrapment. And so planetary and personal healing for me, as this book goes on and on, they begin to blur. And again, maybe you understand this in your way, dear reader out there, listener. So that's all I'll read for now. But thank you so much for listening.
Absolutely fascinating and riveting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. I'm looking forward to reading your book. It really resonated with me. Our next reader tonight is Patricia Caspers. She is the founding editor-in-chief of West Trestle Review. She won the Nimrod-Hardman Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry and is a Hedgebrook alumni. Her work has been published in journals such as Plowshares and Sugar House Review. Her third full-length poetry collection, The Most Kissed Woman in the World, was published this year by Kelsay Books. Her other books are Some Flawed Magic and In the Belly of the Albatross. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Simmons, and thank you so much, Suzanne, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to be reading with Greg and Charles. The first poem I'm going to read, it's hard to see with my blur on, but this is from my first book, Some Flawed Magic. And this poem was published in Terrain originally. I was an undergrad at Chico State University in California, and I wrote this poem after the Paradise Fire. What Smoke is Made of, Paradise, California, 1997. In the particle dark, we rose like mist. We mattered. The door of dawn unlatched, and we trembled our clothes on in its shine. His belt clinked against itself like a clock. Our footsteps stirred the damp scent of soil as the pickup doors creaked open, and I lumbered my roundness into the rectangle of space. We raced the ridge in the morning quiet, chasing sunlight. Hours before she arrived with her raspy squall, cradle cap, boxer's fists, and everything that we were combusted, leaving only the vapor of that moment as we watched the sun churn the clouds above the valley and held fast to the horizon, named it something like a vow. And then I have a bunch of sticky notes on my new book. This is The Most Kissed Woman in the World. And the first poem I'm going to read is a ghazal. It's also, it's the only ghazal I've ever written, and it's also about wildfire. Oh, every poem in this book is a portrait of God. So this is Portrait of God as California Wildfire. The origin is mystery. Chain scrapes asphalt, sparks leap a pickup's undercarriage, smolder drought grass, hidden smoke. Cigarette versus oxygen tank, which is to say addiction or pain that burns like a scorned lover's letters, gone ash, gone smoke. Neglected bonfire or warming fire when camp is necessity and not leisure. When tents blossom beside a river and disperse like smoke. One spring, a young god camped along the mud bank, caught a fire, tossed flames into water. Undoused, it eddied like smoke. Years later, God hiked a burned mountain, charred pines, blackened needles, cindered soil, found surprise, the hearth scent of smoke. For a while, I was a newspaper reporter, and I had to cover one of the fires in our town or near our town. And I was so surprised when I went out there because it smelled so good. It's just smelled like a campfire. It was just such a bizarre feeling. And so that's sort of where that came from. This poem was also published in Terrain. It's Portrait of God as Glittering of Hummingbirds. We are fever of ruby gorget, a streak of smoke-filtered sun on a cloudless morning. We are not the names you've given us. We are cups of cattail and willow, wolf silk, moth silk, lichen and moss. We are nestled in a crook of blue oak, delighting in the understory. We climb the silver ladder of sky, plummet and trill our desire. We are window reflection, tabby's paw, weight of bumblebee. We are all the names you've given us. We are bright nectar dilating the map of home, autumn's sudden frost. And I was thinking about this poem when Greg was reading about his tree that felt like the tree of life. This is Portrait of God as Girl Ginkgo. And you probably all know, but that female ginkgo trees are very stinky and people try not to grow them because they stink so much. So I kind of love that. Portrait of God as Girl Ginkgo. Before words, there was a cool slake of river. The depths I quarried and the silver eddies where I shucked each spent leaf. Amber fluke, tattered wing of swallowtail, the silt cradle where a single blade might press its shadow into the firmament. You complain of my creature odor, name the scent vomit, semen, but I blossom green as spring, grow golden with summer shine, orbit my own self with small, dazzling suns. And if their ripening into the future offends your human senses, I am not sorry. Come glacier, come tiger moth, come beetle, come fission, come atom with concrete and smog, the work-worn hands that bind my roots in shallow city boxes, fingers that each autumn gather my seeds from where they land on the asphalt where there once was a river. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so this is Portrait of God as Mother Stegosaurus. And when I was researching this one, I learned that anthropologists can tell, or archaeologists can tell whether a Stegosaurus was a female or a male because her bones would change depending on whether or not she'd I guess had baby stegosauri. I don't know. Anyway, I learned a lot about this. It's a very short poem, and but I researched a lot for it. So, Portrait of God as Mother Stegosaurus. Except that I build hatchlings from marrow, except rivals gnash and pierce one another's skulls for the pleasure of my body, except that I am yet sapling, unfinished, ringing into my own possibility when the future is demanded of me, except that I am armor and will not be taken by whim or deceit. What do they see in my inner architecture except the endling in themselves? And this one is Portrait of God as Aggregate of Manatees. And one thing I learned about manatees is that they, in order to rise, you maybe all know this, to rise, they pass gas. And that's how they get higher in the water. Isn't that fascinating? So I tried to make it as poetic as possible. Portrait of God as Aggregate of Manatees. Barnacles scarred in brackish shallows, manatees don algae green sweaters and circle sweet seagrass. Submarines we see in them, elephants, cows, mermaids who tempt, swish of tail, the homesick mariner from his vessel. While we symbol their wrinkled bodies, while we strap their peduncles and divine their patterns, rippling the surface tension, manatees graze and glide gracefully, mating or perhaps pulling a latched nursling nestled under fin, tide rising by the power of their own digestion. We, the manatee's only predator, work steadily to save them as we serve them toxic blooms, motor blades, ghost line. We monitor manatee distress, write it in our notebooks, how they lift the injured, their dying kind. Let's see. I'm just going to read one more. And this is, I would love to read it with another person. At some point, I'm going to try that, but there are two sides of the poem. So it's Portrait of God as Mission Fig and Female Fig Wasp, a dialogue. And one side is the fig side and one side is the wasp side. So you're just going to have to imagine it. Fat-bellied men in pointy hats. We are starful in our plentitude. Bat-wing scrotums, sexy when ripe. Beckoned by an echo of scent, feverfish in flight, pollen light. Squeeze us into any box, we take its shape. Disinterested in sting, we burrow. Turn us on our side, we're platypusian. Into the sweet and meaty heart that sustains you. One father tried to namesake us. The journey a severing, we sacrifice our wings. Palmed us over along with a pox. Eschew, escape, pirouette, the ever after. But we are thousands, floral mycelium. Shade gathering, hands pluck the tender fruit. We blossom inside ourselves, invite death, melt all danger. Sun-warm and sticky, fear-pressed, your lips on our wet, pink tongues, our work awaiting joy. Thank you.
Patricia, thank you so much for that beautiful reading of your lush, powerful poems. Congratulations on your new book. I'm really looking forward to checking it out after hearing you. Wow, impressive. I am going to introduce Mr. Charles Goodrich, who is the author of 2 volumes of poems, Going to Seed, Dispatches from the Garden and Insects of South Corvallis, as well as a collection of essays about nature, parenting, and building his own house, the practice of home. His first published novel is Weave Me a Crooked Basket, published by University of Nevada Press in 2023. He has also co-edited Forest Understory, Creative Inquiry in an Old Growth Forest, and In the Blast Zone, Catastrophe and Renewal on Mount St. Helen. After working for 25 years as a professional gardener, he served as a director of the Spring Creek Project of 4 Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word at Oregon State University, and is now retired. Let's welcome Charles.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Simmons, thank you, as always, for your gracious hosting and the terrific work of terrain.org. Suzanne mentioned my most recent book is a novel, Weave Me a Crooked Basket. It's a love story between some unlikely characters and a love story for the land they hold dear, and features some audacious art activism in trying to save that land from a hostile takeover. And I'd be honored if you wanted to pick it up. However, I'm a poet first and last, and I wanted to share poems with you this evening. 6 in particular, 3 from my earlier volumes and 3 relatively new poems. First of all, thank you, Greg, for that beautiful entry into the world of Peruvian ayahuasca healing. Patricia, yeah, I'm with you with your ruby gorget hummingbirds and your stinky ginkgos. Those were great. And Suzanne, I have to tell you that Dear America, the terrific anthology from Terrain, is full of gems, but your poem, It's Time to Teach My Daughter How to Shoot an Arrow, is my favorite. I wanted to read, start with a poem. It's an elegy, but it's a hopeful elegy, I like to think. It imagines a long life and a good death. And it originated when a bird crashed into our living room window, which happens way too often. Oftentimes they're stunned and they recover, but in this case, it was a yellow rump warbler. And when I went out to see how it was doing, picked it up and it had expired. And I said to it, I said, "Oh, you should have lived lived into old age." And I carried that with me for a long time, feeling guilty about our human windows and our cats and the Holocaust we purvey on birds, until finally I settled down and composed this poem. It's called Birds Dying of Old Age. It's in 4 parts. The sparrow decided eons ago that when her time came, she'd just give up fighting the fleas and ticks and lie down in the duff and close her eyes and let the little people eat her back to the earth. Just let me get back to Mexico, the turkey vulture is thinking, halfway across the gulf, his shoulder socket grinding with pain. Back to my favorite tree with the cow bones scattered underneath and the beautiful view of the empty chaparral. The storm petrel was traveling solo, riding a northeasterly off Kamchatka when her heart stopped. She crumpled into a feathered clump, and the wind carried her a few miles farther before dropping her into the North Pacific. And Anna's hummingbird laps up a nightcap from our feeder, then returns to his favorite viburnum. As darkness descends, he latches his claws around a familiar twig and falls asleep and never wakes up. The scarlet feathers of his gorget fade, but for years his desiccated body will remain perched there on the branch. Yeah, I've written a lot of poems about insects, often individual insects I met intimately and had some kind of little personal exchange with, mostly when I was working in the garden. So I wanted to read a couple of bug poems for you. This one is about a creature I find it difficult to appreciate, but every creature has its gifts, and try to give them their due. This is a prose poem from Going to Seed. It's called The Behavior of Flies. I've always thought they were good-for-nothing freeloaders, trash mongers, corpse defilers. Even the adults were just winged maggots to my mind. But this one on the porch rail appears to be doing exercises, push-ups, neck stretches, and wing flexing isometrics, which makes sense when you think about it. For what is the fate of an out-of-shape fly? Its wings are like isinglass. It has bulbous eyes the color of chestnuts, and whenever I lean close, it crouches and holds still, ready to flee if I move to strike. And I am tempted to take a swat. It's a kind of itch in my chest muscles, an urge to lash out. The behavior of humans and flies. Here's another bug poem. It's about cabbage moths. When I showed this poem originally to the entomologist and poet Robert Michael Pyle, Bob said, "Charles, they're butterflies. Those are cabbage white butterflies. So get your terminology right." Well, Bob was right, but I learned, as a gardener, I learned to call them cabbage moths. I think because maybe that makes them easier to kill. I don't know. But I stuck with the original vernacular poem about cabbage moths. They are terrible garden pests, but they have this one redeeming quality, which I particularly admire. To mate on the wing. Now that's a trick I want to learn. Hopped up on pheromones, legs twitching, wings flapping impossibly fast. For that, I'd take a spin as an insignificant lepidopterid. For that, I'd give up all my nature programs, rock music, erotic poetry. I'd even do penance in the egg. I'd crawl through adolescence on my belly, eating none of the food I love, eating nothing but cabbage, cabbage, cabbage. For that instant of sudden weightlessness, fluttering with my beloved on the verge of a holy convulsion, I await my turn. Don't know if reincarnation is real, and I'm not certain that I'd want to come back as a cabbage moth, but if I did, I would know what to do. I'm going to read 3 new poems now. Robert and Wall Kimmerer was in town this week. I went to hear her give a terrific talk on her work on gathering sweetgrass. It was so inspiring to see the students turn out in droves, and they were so excited by her vision of intimacy with the natural world, plants and animals in particular, and her insistence on having a reciprocal relationship with plants. So this is a poem somewhat irreverently in honor of Robin. It's called Reciprocity. It's in 3 parts. 2 are in the present and 1 is the middle section is a memory. Reciprocity. At dusk, a mother raccoon skulks past the edge of the garden with a pair of kits in tow. They're the thieves who've been digging up my seedlings to get at the fish meal fertilizer buried beneath. Hey, I see you, I shout, brandishing my hoe as she nonchalantly shepherds her crew into the culvert under the driveway. a late spring day 40 years ago, working as a groundskeeper for the children's farm home. I was burning a giant brush pile, flames ripping loudly through the dead debris, when a hair-raising scream flared up, and a huge raccoon, his hind end scorched and smoking, galloped out of the fire. They've been stealing our cherries, too, clambering high into the branches, gorging on ripe fruit, then leaving a big pile of coon poop under the Royal Anne. Troublesome, intelligent creatures. Every few days, I walk out to the orchard and piss on their shit. Forgive me for scent marking in this noble medium, but a gardener's got to do what he's got to do. My wife and I just returned from a 3-week trip to the southern Utah, hiking in canyonlands and arches. Magnificent, magnificent country. So grateful to be there and fortunate, privileged. Also enjoyed the long drive back across lonely Nevada. This is a poem that traces that. This is a brand new poem. I just wrote that this week and a little anxious to share something that's new, but you'll be kind, I'm sure. It's called Crossing the Sagebrush Ocean, and it has an epigraph from Henry David Thoreau from early in Walden. Thoreau says, "At a certain season of our life, we are accustomed to consider every spot as the possible site of a house. If we spotted Henry hitchhiking along US 50, the loneliest road in America, Life magazine dubbed it, through the high Nevada sagebrush steppe, we'd pick him up. And together we could try on these isolated ranches, the crouching, wind-racked houses surrounded by crack-limbed cottonwoods and dead tractors. And now this gray single-wide with its screen door hanging off one hinge and a little pink bicycle with a missing rear wheel upturned in the gravel by the burned-out garage. My wife asleep in the passenger seat, Henry stunned into silence in the back, tires whining over the asphalt. Highway 50, a great drive up and down over the basin and range. This is the last poem. Thank you so much. Honored to be here. As always, appreciate your listening. This poem is going to appear in a month in Neil Shepard's wonderful online journal, Plant Human Quarterly. We have an acre here on the edge of Corvallis, and that's more than we can garden on. So we, some years back, we decided we would let half an acre go back to a meadow, be a natural landscape. Wonderful idea. Turns out that the next successional stage here in the Willamette Valley is blackberries, wild rose, and hawthorns. So not a meadow, more like a thicket. So in the absence of grazing bison or elk or fire, which the Kalapuya used to maintain the open grasslands, we mow. That's what a mower is, a substitute for grazing animals. But before that happens, when the grass is literally up to our chins, I love to go out and spend some time in it. This is called Inhabit the Grass. Before the man with the brush mower comes, I wade into the orchard's waist-high grass, lower myself to the ground, and sit cross-legged among the free. The air smells of wild anise and ripe soil. A light breeze teases my hair. I watch a white crab spider feed on a mason bee inside a blossom of field bindweed. And now a hoverfly latches onto a seed head of tall fescue, sprinkling pollen onto my pants. Old and stiff as I am, it will take some time to get to my feet. I draw a breath, roll to my knees, and untangle myself from a tendril of bed straw clinging to my wrist. Thank you so much.
Wow. Charles, that was wonderful. It was hilarious and beautiful and informative for someone like me who didn't know a whole lot about the bugs. Thank you so much. Can we give it up for all of our readers tonight, all our wonderful readers? Let's all maybe unmute and give them some real applause. So they can hear it.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Hey!
That in the online meetings, the sound. Does anyone have any questions for us? Really wonderful readings from everyone. Anyone have any questions in the chat, Simmons?
I'm not seeing it in the chat. I just see a hand raised toward the end there. Did someone have a question and we missed it? No, okay. Well, I can ask a question if we need to get us started. Oh, okay, Dale Olson's got a question. Dale, you want to unmute and ask?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
You are.
Okay. Hello, Charles. I enjoyed your reading so much, along with the others. And I just wanted to know the answer to the question you posed in your poem about the fly. What is the fate of the fly who does not exercise?
I suppose even lazy corpulent flies multiply without end. So, but they do seem to keep in good shape, don't they?
You just caught one when they were going through their machinations.
Correct. It's kind of rare to see a fly sit down and stay still for long enough. Not that he was still, but perched on a railing for long enough to really inspect them. But most insects, the other thing it raises is who's more intelligent here? The fly is paying a lot more attention to me than I am to the fly. So the fly's consciousness is acute and ceaseless. Humans, la-di-da, we go through life not paying much attention to most things. But the fly sees it all.
Well, I applaud your restraint in not swatting that particular fly.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat for Greg. They want to know what ayahuasca program did you attend in Peru and where in the Amazon did it take place? I think seeing it throws me off with the pronunciation. Okay.
But you'll pronounce it by the end, Suzanne. We'll get you there.
Did you get that?
Yeah. So, Barbara, thank you so much for your question. And I see that you're from Gainesville, Florida, which is near Jacksonville, which is where I grew up and where a lot of the memoir takes place. But so this retreat took place at a center called Dream Glade, and I actually found it on Reddit. I did not have tenure at my university. I just was really desperate for help. And so I actually went on Reddit and found this place, which don't anyone ever do that. Please don't do that. But I had a really good experience and fortunately, and the place was called Dream Glade. And then, and that took place probably about probably an hour and a half outside of Iquitos, which is, that large city in the Amazon in Peru. Thank you for your question.
Anyone else? Okay. What about you, Simmons? Do you have any questions?
Well, I have a question, and I'd love to hear from all the writers. We heard this perspective from Patricia and Charles, which is the perspective of the being. So you were inhabiting, whether it's a buzzard or a hummingbird or a tree or whatever. And I'm interested in how you go about writing that. And then for Greg, as a follow-on, if you've done any sort of writing from that context, or if in your sort of psychedelic experience in the Amazon, if you could I guess feel that, be that, you know what I mean? So maybe let's start with Patricia.
So my poems came from just my admiration of whatever I was writing about, and then in order to sort of create a persona poem, I just did a lot of research, and then I had to try hard to forget my research so that I didn't sound like I was writing an academic paper. Yeah, and I also was coming from, I was thinking a lot about the, the names that in the United States, we the English words that we have given these natural things in the world, and why they are called that, and what they were called before they were called that, and and how there was a time when they didn't have a name at all, and yet they existed. So I guess that's how I sort of tried to get into that state of being.
And I can't say that I necessarily felt like I didn't necessarily feel like I felt particularly drawn to a particular creature, but I definitely, while I was in the Amazon, felt, I mean, because I've worked with ayahuasca quite a bit, and I've been on what are called dietas, which are these long kind of meditation retreats, and you're eating very little, and you're in silence. And so, there were times in those stretches when it really felt like the rainforest was my mother, was our mother. And and that's not a special or new insight or anything, but I can tell you that it had a profound effect on me as someone who really needed to be remothered, to feel that, that kinship with Mother Earth. And then, to hear in the distance at times, to hear the illegal loggers with their chainsaws, going at it, was pretty excruciating. So it's that kind of, I've definitely felt that kind of kinship with the super intelligent mega quantum computer called the Amazon rainforest.
I might answer that by referring to some comments that Robin Kimmer made the other night. She trained as a botanist as well as a traditional ecological knowledge scientist, and in her Western scientific studies, she was always distressed by how her mentors wouldn't let her speak about plants and animals as animate, and it scolded her for anthropomorphizing. But she said, plants and animals have feelings. They're not, and thoughts. They're not human feelings and thoughts, but humans we're the limited ones. We are limited to trying to evoke those thoughts and feelings in plants and animals by analogy with our own experience. So I really, from my years working as a professional gardener, you have to contend with the pests in the garden, but to think like a mole or to think like an aphid, which is effective for controlling them, you enter their being, and you can't help but learn to, wow, these are so beautiful. Moles are beautiful, beautiful beings, and to dig through the soil as if it was water, that fast. That they all, every one of them is powerful animals, and so I particularly set it as my goal to kind of try to represent scorned animals, the ones who we don't pay any attention to, or all of our attention is how to kill them. Not to deny that they aren't sometimes pests and sometimes warrant killing, maybe, but that they are miracles. Look at them first. Look at them. Give them their due. Walk a mile in their shoes, if you will. So I'm always ground my poems in personal experience. I try to look hard first. Basho says, you want to write about the pine, go to the pine. Later, maybe you want to read about the pine and get some more cool facts, but get your experience inside you first.
Thank you. You're still muted, Suzanne.
Steve seems to have a question. Do you want to unmute, Steve, and ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, actually, the discussion's been really interesting. And one of the things that I wanted to ask all three of the readers, the only one I know is Charles, because I did go to the Spring Creek Project, one of their meetings, before he retired, fortunately. But all of the readers tonight seem to be able to inhabit in some way, almost speak at times from the perspective of a natural creature or a plant or an animal, which reminded me of Ed Yong's book, An Immense World, where he tries to show us how different species perceive the world and how differently it is from how we do. I just wondered if all of the readers could address that, and how a part of it is knowledge, I know, that and the research that they've done, but also I would like to know if there's something intuitive, some kind of route in to maybe getting a sense of what that creature is experiencing apart from the research that they do. So that's my question. It's a rather longly expressed, expansively expressed question, but I hope that there's some way they can address it.
Anyone want to take that? I feel like maybe we already, any intuitive ways?
I'd make a literary reference to that. I talked about how I learned to encounter insects and working closely with them as a gardener. But I first encountered that idea in a poem by Gary Snyder. I think it's in Paiute Creek, which ends, he's looking out and he's imagining the immensity of the world, and he ends back there in the, I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's back there behind me in the brush, cold, proud eyes of cougar or coyote, watch me rise and go. Chilling moment when the human is the one being observed, and I wow to realize that the flies and the hummingbirds and raccoons and everything, the javelinas, everything, everywhere you are keeping track of you all the time. So they're incredibly perceptive and intelligent. So that's one place I start.
Thanks.
And I was also thinking about, I guess my poem started in frustration, because I was thinking about, what humans are doing to the animals. And I guess that's sort of how I got into the mindset of the animal, was thinking like, what you know, if I were this animal, what would the humans be doing to me? And sometimes I'm including myself in that. I have a poem about bees and, how much I love the food that bees are being forced to pollinate. And anyway, so I think that's where I started with mine too.
Thanks.
I'd say for me that I think about your question, Steve, in kind of neurological terms. That each of us has this rigid personal self, and it's propped up by a certain array, you could say, of neural networks called the default mode network. Maybe some of you have heard this. And so anytime we're really paying attention, anytime we're in meditation, or even just really present with another creature, or perhaps we're using, turning to psychedelics. Indigenous people have done this for thousands and thousands of years, and it was integrated into their culture. And of course, Robin Wall Kimmerer teaches us that the difference between humans and non-human living things is really nil in the end. I think however we go about calming the default mode network in the brain and sort of dissolving the ego, once you do that, then depending on your circumstances, where you are, you can know things intuitively about another creature that you shouldn't be able to know, or that are surprising. So I think that we've got to find a way to calm the chatter in the mind, and once we can do that, and be a bit more one-pointed and calm the default mode network down, I think we can really develop compassion for other creatures, but also really develop a sense of true kinship and even twinship, in a sense, with other sentient non-human creatures. So it's good to get out of the house and be outside paying attention.
Right. Well, thank you all. This was a wonderful reading, and the contrast between the three of you and the things that were similar was really great. It was a really nice collection of voices, all amplifying and I guess speaking with each other in some way. Thank you.
Well, Steve, I don't think we could have said that better ourselves, Suzanne and I. I think that's a great way to end. So I want to thank Suzanne for hosting us this evening, and Patricia and Charles and Greg, as I see them in order on my screen here, for their really wonderful words and wisdom, and sharing that with us this evening. And I want to thank everybody else tonight for coming out, and wish you a wonderful, well, we're summer down here, but spring/summer evening, wherever you may be. Thank you.
Thank you, Simmons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Wonderful to meet you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.